The infamous warcaster, Alexander Karchev, now commonly known as Kachev the Terrible, is a testament to Khadoran ingenuity and, more importantly, the never-say-die attitude, quite literally in Karchev's case, that defines Khador as a nation. Beyond the obvious, what makes Karchev such a fascinating subject is that he has personally experienced some of the most pivotal events of the last century, and at nearly 140 years of age, he is by far the oldest living human warcaster. Alexander Karchev stands apart from other Khadoran warcasters not simply by the fact that he has lived for so long, but because of how he has lived for so long. After a devastating injury nearly a century ago, Karchev's life is sustained, some may say unnaturally so, by mechanical augmentation, a remarkable feat of engineering. Karchev's preservation poses some interesting questions. The money and resources required to keep him alive, plus build and maintain his numerous warjack bodies, are staggering, especially when said resources have been spent for the benefit of a single individual. Khador has lost scores of warcasters in battles across the same span of time, so what makes Karchev so important that the High Command would spare no expense to keep him alive? The other obvious question one must ask concerns why innovations learned in this process have not been replicated. Certainly the integration of living man with powerful mechanics Certainly, the integration of a living man with powerful mechanica has tremendous potential, both on and off the battlefield. So why have we not seen this technology used to preserve the life of other important national figures? Karchev has certainly proven he can still contribute to the motherland as well as any of her other favorite sons, and he was and still is a powerful warcaster. With over a century of battlefield experience, Karchev has been an instrumental fixture in Khador's military might. Some of Khador's enemies like to compare Karchev to another infamous warcaster, Ursus Octavi, the so-called Butcher of Kardov. Both have reputations for extreme patriotism, as well as brutality, and both have been used to quote-unquote punish the enemy on various occasions. However, beyond these qualities, these two warcasters have almost nothing in common. Where many in the High Command consider the Butcher a loose cannon, Karchev has an unequaled record of reliability and almost inhuman discipline. Reportedly, Khadoran documents referring to Karchev describe his intelligence and wealth of tactical knowledge from more than a century of warfare. Combined with his warcaster abilities, this experience makes him an invaluable resource to any military campaign. It is certainly no coincidence that Supreme Commandant Idris has frequently relied upon Karchev as a cornerstone in his campaigns. The following dossier should shed some light on the man in the machine and provide some answers to the many enigmas that define Alexander Karchev. Alexander Karchev Summary. Born 469 AR. Information on Karchev's childhood is scant at best, and it is unclear whether he was an orphan or whether records of his parentage were systematically eliminated. Records indicate his arcane talents manifested at a young age, and it is possible there was an incident of uncontrolled sorcery that prompted him to become a ward of the state, a common practice of this era. Military training 483. At an earlier age than normal, Karchev enters the Druzina, the elite Khadoran military academy in Kursk. He is assigned special mentorship under a Kolden in the Grey Lord's Covenant to discipline his powerful sorcery. In 484, he becomes an Ubnich, or apprentice of the Covenant, and it is likely his warcaster talent was recognized at this time. Grey Lord's Covenant 488. After perfecting his warcaster abilities and completing officer training, Karchev attains the arcane rank of Rastovik within the Grey Lords. He is given controller status in 489 and sent on a tour with the 3rd Border Legion with a small battle group. After a successful 2-year tour, Karchev was accredited as a full Magzivev and commander in 491. He rose to respect and acclaim within the Covenant alongside the 1st and 5th Border Legions. King Vigor ascends 499. Karchev is embraced by the new king and becomes an instrumental figure in Vigor's ambitious military campaigns. During this time period, Karchev gains a reputation for tactical brilliance and masterful control over his warjacks, along with an unflinching willingness to obey the sometimes harsh dictates of the king and his commandants. Thornwood War, 510 to 511. Karchev, now a highly decorated warcaster, is considered King Vigor's most powerful weapon in the war against Signar. He is responsible for a number of crushing victories as Khador battered through the border defenders and proceeded deep into the Thornwood, fighting towards the Dragon's Tongue River. Battle of the Tongue, 511. Karchev leads a vanguard command in this final battle. He is drawn into an ambush and gravely wounded. Karchev battles on and eventually kills Signar warcaster Colonel Drake Cathmore, although his body is nearly destroyed in the process. Karchev somehow survives his injuries and is sent back north. Life Support Mechanica, 511 to 513. The High Command decides to preserve Karchev's life. A mechanical, life-sustaining vivification housing is created for his ruined body. Mechanica Experimentation, 514 to 520. In an effort to make use of Karchev's still potent mind and sorcerous abilities, the Khadoran Mechanics Assembly assembles to integrate his body into a customized warjack chassis. Adjusting Cortex housing to receive instructions from a living mind proves exceedingly difficult, resulting in many failed attempts. Man in the Machine, 521. The Khadoran Mechanics Assembly successfully integrates Karchev's vivification housing into a warjack chassis, providing the warcaster with a fully mobile mechanical armature. However, it will be nearly a decade before Karchev's warjack frame is deemed fully battle-ready. Border Skirmish, 530. Karchev leads a small battle group against a Signaran border outpost. Reports from Signaran field officers after the battle mentions a terrifying warjack with the ability to command other machines. Upgraded, 535. Karchev's warjack frame is upgraded based on the redesigned Juggernaut chassis. Border Skirmish, 538. Signaran reconnaissance agent successfully identifies Karchev leading a force near Deepwood Tower. This is the first recorded use of Kachev the Terrible in reference to the fact that he was presumed dead previously. Upgraded, 545. Karchev's warjack frame is upgraded with a steam engine similar to that employed by the new Kodiak chassis. Upgraded, 570. After suffering significant damage, Karchev's warjack frame is overhauled. The experimental arcane turbine is part of the upgrades included in the repairs. Karchev's physical body has atrophied considerably, and there was a marked reduction in lower torso mass. Upgraded, 585. Karchev's warjack frame is upgraded per his specifications to the Khadoran Mechanics Assembly, including greater range of motion for his arms. Llael's War, 604. Karchev and a force of damaged and aging warjacks attacks the Signaran fortified castle of Northgard to keep the First Army garrisoned there occupied, while Khadoran forces launch an offensive against Llael. 605. The High Command orders Karchev unleashed upon Riversmed, destroys the city's defenses, and slaughters its remaining inhabitants. First attack on Northgard, 606. Under Commandant Irusk, Karchev leads the initial assault against Northgard. Although Khador fails to take the castle, Karchev personally destroys many enemy warjacks and slaughters scores of Signaran troops. In the wake of this attack, Signar has difficulty resupplying the fortress to its full strength. Second attack on Northgard, 607. Karchev is instrumental in the success of Supreme Commandant Irusk's second attack on Northgard. After the castle falls, Karchev personally kills General Hagen Cathmore, the Earl of Bloodsbane, Lord of Northgard, and descendant of Colonel Drake Cathmore. Battle of Port Bourne, 608. Karchev joins in 2 attacks on Port Bourne. He is credited for the breach of the wall that leads to the seizure of the northern battlements. Circumstances after this are remained unclear, but Cryx seems to have invaded behind Khador, during which Karchev disappears. His ruined warjack frame is found after the battle, with no sign of Karchev himself. As always, I find it best to start at the beginning by researching my subject's origins, however humble they may be, to gain a better understanding of his motivations. However, records of Karchev's early life are scant at best, and virtually nothing exists regarding his family lineage. I find this very odd. Certainly, the history of a man considered a Khadoran national treasure is worth preserving. The first records I can find of Karchev come from the Druzina in Kursk, the elite Khador military academy responsible for the training of many of the nation's best officers and warcasters. Karchev was enrolled in the Druzina at the age of 14, very young for a candidate. I've seen records of similar circumstances. However, in this case, where Khadoran youths were involved in spontaneous and destructive outbursts of arcane ability, it was customary for them to become wards of the state and to enter military service under the supervision of the Grey Lord's Covenant. Records indicate that his warcaster talents quickly manifested. Specific names of Grey Lord mentors or any other family connections are conspicuously absent. Karchev was formally inducted into the ranks of the Grey Lord's Covenant as a Rastovik at the age of 19 and was given authority as a warjack controller in the following year. I again could not find any reliable information regarding his exploits during this 2-year probationary period, although I did confirm he spent this tour with the 3rd Border Legion. This opened him up to any number of possible conflicts along the border, as well as defending the Khadoran interior. Given his age, the nature of this assignment suggests the Covenant's high regard for his superlative skills with warjacks, a skill he has retained to this day. Records proved far more reliable as Karchev began to take a more active role in Khador's military. By the time King Vigor takes the throne in 499, Karchev is a full Magziev. Within the Grey Lord's Covenant and a well-respected warcaster and commander with a reputation for effectively controlling a large number of warjacks simultaneously. Apparently King Vigor favored Karchev, appreciating his tactical skill and the unwavering brutality he has shown to the enemies of the motherland. Not surprising, Karchev prospered under Vigor's rule and was instrumental in many of the conquest-minded king's military endeavors. The following report from a Khadoran officer after a Cryxian incursion near Skrofenberg aptly illustrates Karchev's abilities.
Commander, Strokenberg is secure and the Cryxian invaders have been destroyed. Regrettably, Kovnik Vikola Levnik was slain in the initial attack, leaving us unable to draw upon his warjacks for much of the battle. Had the reinforcements led by Magziev Commander Alexander Karchev not arrived when they did, I fear we would have been overrun. I had heard that Commander Karchev was a renowned warcaster, but I had never fought beside him before. When he arrived, Magziev had with him 4 warjacks of his own, 2 juggernauts and 2 berserkers. However, he also commandeered Kovnik Levnik's 3 berserkers which had gone inert after the Kovnik's death. I have never seen or even heard of a single warcaster so aptly controlling 7 warjacks at the same time, but Commander Karchev seemed undaunted as he led what remained of our troops in a fierce offensive against the Cryxian invaders. Commander Karchev used his warjacks as an impenetrable screen that drove into the Cryxian forces with brutal charge. The Magziev's warjacks acted in perfect unison, slaughtering the Cryxian abominations in waves. Our troops followed behind, supporting the warjacks with rifle and artillery fire, while the commander used his sorcery to shatter scores of thralls with blasts of force that ripped the very earth asunder. Within minutes, the enemy had been completely annihilated and we sustained no further casualties. Commander Karchev's reputation is certainly well deserved, and any citizen of the motherland should be proud that he serves amongst us. I have assumed the command of the garrison here in Strokenberg, and I will keep things in order until Kovnik Levnin's replacement arrives. Captain Yakov Durov.
As anyone with a passing knowledge of history knows, King Vigor initiated hostilities with Signar in 510, leading to the Thornwood War. By this time, Karchev was one of the king's most trusted military leaders, and was perhaps Khador's mightiest warcaster at the time. As such, Karchev was integral in Khador's battle plans on both on and off the field, and he was personally responsible for a number of crushing victories against Signaran forces early in the war, most notably the Battle of Thornfall and the Battle of Deep Gulch. Karchev was at the height of his abilities by this point, and at 40 winters he had 20 years of battlefield experience to complement his fearsome martial and arcane prowess. However, even Karchev's considerable talents could not undo the damage caused by King Vigor's dubious tactical decisions. Despite the king's failings, Karchev remained unquestionably and brutally effective, inflicting heavy casualties upon the Signarans at each and every engagement. The Battle of the Tongue, the last and greatest battle of the Thornwood War, was the most pivotal moment in recent history, and is without a doubt the most significant event in Karchev's long life. The battle took place near the banks of the Dragon's Tongue River, and Karchev and his battle group were sent to secure the great stone bridge that spanned it. When Karchev arrived at the bridge, it was held by a token force of Signarans, and the Maxiev immediately engaged them in battle. Apparently unable to stand before the superior Khadoran forces, the Signarans feigned a retreat. Colonel Drake Cathmore and those Signaran forces arrayed to stall Vigor's army ambushed Karchev and his troops on the other side of the river. Whether Karchev was actually fooled by this ambush or simply believed he could put a decisive end to the battle is unknown, but he gave chase rather than waiting for the rest of his vanguard. Although he was terribly outnumbered, Karchev battled fiercely, inflicting heavy casualties on the Signaran troops before taking grievous injuries himself. Undeterred by his own wounds or the hopelessness of his position, Karchev made a final offensive push to engage Cathmore directly. No one is certain what exactly transpired in this battle, but the best theory is that Karchev expected to die of his wounds and sought to take his enemy with him. Whatever his reasons, he unleashed such a tremendous blast of arcane power that it consumed the both of them. Cathmore was slain, but Karchev somehow survived. The following letter was written shortly after the Battle of the Tongue. It was sent from the senior-most field medic present after the battle and is addressed to the head of the Hospice of the 3rd Army in Kursk, the most advanced medical facility in Khador at the time. It gruesomely illustrates the nature and extent of Karchev's injuries.
Kovnik, Maxiev Commander Alexander Karchev lives, and will shortly be on his way to you. However, to put it bluntly, he should be dead. His injuries are nothing short of catastrophic, and I believe there is little that can be done for him beyond what aid we have already provided. The most pervasive and immediately apparent of Karchev's injuries was caused by an intense arcane blast that inflicted both severe burns and tremendous concussive force upon his body. Both of his arms were torn from the torso, his right arm at the shoulder and his left arm just above the elbow. His right leg was burnt so badly we removed it at the hip. His left leg has been crushed by debris to the point where we could not save it, and it too was removed at the hip. It is possible you may need to exercise additional necrotic flesh. Karchev's other wounds include 2nd and 3rd degree burns over most of his torso, significant internal injuries due to multiple gunshot wounds, including a punctured lung and a perforated liver. Maxiev Karchev has also suffered a skull fracture, and many of the bones in his face were all but pulverized. His eyes were spared somehow. May not be praised for small miracles. Any of the injuries I described above is more than sufficient to kill a man. That Karchev sustained them all and yet somehow clings to life is a testament to the god's cruelty or the commander's own immense desire to remain amongst the living. I do not expect him to live much longer. Should he manage to survive the trip back to Kursk, it is important that you understand that your duty is to keep him comfortable and make the passing of this great hero as painless as possible. I suggest you consult with the clergy to ascertain whether the grace of Minov can ease the commander's passing. Captain Yuri Megviev, 3rd Khadoran Medical Corps.
Despite the extent of his injuries, Karchev lingered, and records indicate that he regained consciousness roughly 6 months after being transferred to the hospice of the 3rd Army in Kursk. This prompted a flurry of correspondence between the High Command and Kovnik Victor Derova, the senior officer at the hospice. The contents of these letters are fairly pedestrian, and most express the High Command's commitment to keeping Karchev alive, despite the considerable cost of his care. The following letter, however, is quite intriguing, and is the first indication that Karchev was much more than a hapless invalid. Commandant, Commander Alexander Karchev's status has not changed. The majority of his wounds have mended as much as they can be mended, but he remains in considerable pain. We have done all we can to make him comfortable, but there are limits to what I can do. However, he is having trouble accepting his new circumstances. Most soldiers in the commander's condition can do nothing but rage impotently at the gods, at the motherland, at themselves. A rage that typically passes, leaving behind a resigned stoicism. Karchev, however, was and is a powerful arcanist, and his rages are far from impotent. He needs neither hands nor legs to manifest his magic. Almost daily, his anger is unleashed via his sorceress abilities, giving rise to blasts of concussive force resulting in damage to the facility and injuries to my staff. In fact, I have turned to sedating the Maxiev for fear of someone may be killed from his outbursts. I think much of the commander's rage stems from his inability to contribute to our great nation. It is obvious he still retains much power. Additionally, his mind and tactical knowledge have not diminished at all. Perhaps Maxiev Commander Karchev can still be of some use to the military, and I would urge you to at least consider this possibility. Kovnik Victor Derova. As the document above illustrates, Karchev had command of his arcane powers from the moment he regained consciousness. However, it is unclear whether or not he retained the ability to link with and command warjacks. As it turns out, Karchev himself provided the answer to this question when he petitioned, well, demanded really, the High Command to reinstate him and allow him to resume his duties as a warcaster. Obviously, the High Command had its doubts on whether a man as crippled as Karchev could be any use on the battlefield, but Karchev commanded enough respect and sympathy from the military leaders on the day of his request was seriously considered. Karchev was granted an audience with the High Command. Interestingly enough, since Karchev was considered quite the heroic figure at the time, Dmitry Mariovich, a prominent historian, was allowed access to Karchev's hearing and recorded the events therein in his greatest work, The Heroes of the Motherland. I was able to locate a copy of this obscure book, and what follows is an excerpt from this propaganda-laced tome that describes how Karchev made his case to the High Command.
Despite the terrible wounds that diminished him, Maxiev Commander Karchev spoke as if commanding upon the battlefield, and the council sat rapt as he recounted his various victories and contributions to the motherland. There was anger in his voice, and seeing the very foundations of the earth trembled beneath his passionate oration. Great Karchev demanded that his skill, power, and knowledge once again be used for the betterment of our nation and to strike fear into our enemies. When at last he finished speaking, I saw tears in the eyes of the great men in the council chamber, and I too could not help but be moved by this national hero's impassioned appeal. Yet the council was still not convinced, and Supreme Commandant Kohan Rostov asked the Maxiev to provide some proof that he was still capable and an effective military leader. Commander Karchev's response was immediate and shocking. A juggernaut warjack stood outside the Great Hall, its furnace fired and ready. Its sole purpose was to allow the Maxiev a way to demonstrate that he still retained the ability to command the mighty machines of war. I saw Karchev close his eyes, felt the energy gather in the air, and with a tremendous crash the juggernaut burst through the doors of the Great Hall, hammering them from their frames with its hurling mass of its body. It did not break its stride and charged forward in a billowing cloud of smoke, its massive axe held high. The commandants leapt from their chairs of office as the juggernaut barreled towards them. Yet they were not its targets. The warjack's axe crashed down upon the huge stone table with which the High Command had sat for dozens of generations, splitting the granite in twain and plowing the marble floor beneath it. The warjack then yanked its axe free and moved to stand next to Karchev, towering above the disfigured invalid that was his master. All assembled in the hall that day drew the same conclusion. Alexander Karchev was not a man to be dismissed by something as so paltry as his own battered flesh.
Although the above account is likely highly embellished, as was common in Mariovich's historical writings, I do believe that this hearing did take place. Karchev did prove to the High Command that he could still ably command warjacks and harness his battle sorcery. However, the fact remained that he was all but helpless and immobile. If Karchev was to resume his place among Khador's warcasters, this obstacle had to be overcome. Enter the Khadoran Mechanics Assembly, who were tasked with finding a way to get Karchev back onto the battlefield and sustain him there. The following letter and schematics from a senior mechanic describes the solution and its risks devised by the Mechanics Assembly. Although it has taken many hours and much experimentation, we believe we have devised a way to sustain Commander Alexander Karchev's life without need of constant supply for medical attendance. We have designed a mechanical life-sustaining apparatus that will enclose the former commander's body, regulate his biological functions, and provide a steady stream of restorative and pain-deadening salves to exposed flesh, helping to prevent bleeding sores. The housing need only to be maintained once per day by flushing out the waste collection systems, replenishing medicinal stock, and ensuring various functions are running properly. Ultimately, we hope to modify the housing to interface with other mechanical systems, namely those used to control warjack mobility. We believe that once a suitable housing is devised, Maxiev Karchev could in a very real sense act as the cortex for a fully functional warjack chassis. Obviously, there is much we need to do, and many months and even years of hard work ahead of us to achieve this goal. However, we do not believe it is beyond our grasp. Despite the success we have had with the initial design, I must offer a word of caution. This technology is highly experimental, and the integration of flesh and mechanical of this scale has never been attempted before. There is a very real possibility that Commander Karchev would not survive the extensive surgical procedures necessary to connect his biological systems to the housing. Even if the integration is successful, we have no idea what it might do to his mind. We simply do not know if man and machine can be so closely augmented without provoking a mind break. However, the commander's will is strong, and if anyone could survive this process, it is most certainly him. Senior Mechanic Vadim Oryevosky. I consulted with a number of knowledgeable and trustworthy mechanical engineers, all with experience replacing lost limbs with mechanical prosthetics. To a man, they agreed that the process described in the document above, based on the included schematics, would result in a painful death for anyone in good health subjected to it, let alone someone with severe injuries. Obviously, Karchev survived, so it is possible that the Khadoran Mechanics Assembly greatly improved their integration methods before they even attempted the process on him. However, if I have learned anything about Alexander Karchev while completing this dossier, it is that he possesses an irrepressible will, and he may have survived the procedure simply because he would not let himself die. One other thing to note is that the High Command obviously had no reservations of gambling with Karchev's life in an experimental procedure with a high chance of catastrophic failure. Certainly, if such technology, if viable, would be incredibly valuable. Perhaps the High Command believed Karchev's death was an acceptable risk on the promise of mechanical advancement. Although the Khadoran Mechanics Assembly promised to supply Karchev with a powerful warjack body that would allow him to once again command upon the battlefield, it would be well over a decade before they would produce a successful design. My research has revealed nearly 36 designs for warjack bodies produced between 514 and 520. I doubt most of these made it beyond the schematic stage, and what records I could find about those that were built indicate many failures. Success came not through the design of an entirely new warjack body, but through retrofitting older technology. In 521, Karchev's housing was successfully integrated into a modified berserker chassis. The older mechanical relays used by these venerable warjacks proved more receptive to Karchev's mental commands than those used by modern warjacks today. Although the first successful integration occurred in 521, Karchev was unsatisfied with the performance of his new body and demanded frequent changes and even complete overhauls. By the time he took to the battlefield again in 530, however, his modified warjack chassis was a terrifying melding of man and machine. The following report after a Signaran outpost near Merywyn was destroyed is the first documentation I can find regarding Karchev's return to active duty. The Signaran lieutenant who authored the report and interviewed the survivors had an interesting theory on who or what had attacked the outpost.
Sir, as ordered, I have interviewed the survivors on the attack on Fort Lastings, and honestly I don't know what to make of their statements. We have confirmation of Khadorans, warjacks from all witnesses, and there was no question that Khador initiated the attack without provocation. However, every witness states that the attack was carried out solely by warjacks. There were no troops or a warcaster present. If the lack of living forces wasn't enough, a number of witnesses state that one of the warjacks was actually leading and commanding the attack. Descriptions suggest a berserker of some sort. One witness even said that he could see a human face, within the chassis of the machine, but I don't know what to make of that. The witnesses were all good soldiers, and I do not think that they would lie to me. I am left with only the facts as they were presented. As ludicrous as it may seem, is it possible that Khador may have developed a warjack with enough autonomy to lead others of its kind into battle? A terrifying thought, to be sure. Lieutenant Xander Redgrave.
After 530, Karchev was once again at the forefront of Khadoran military actions. Although there were no major conflicts at this time, he took every chance possible to take to the field, leading battle groups against Signaran defenders in border skirmishes, repelling Cryxian raiders off the Khadoran coasts, and even battling Trokan Kriels in the Skarsfeld. The CRS correctly identified Karchev in 538, a prospect that apparently concerned them even more so than the notion of an autonomous leader of other warjacks. It was from these reports that Karchev derived his epitaph, the Terrible, and gained a reputation for having achieved immortality through sheer power of hatred. Ceaseless combat suited Karchev, with ample opportunity to improve and upgrade his warjack body, and he was often the beneficiary of the newest warjack designs. Additionally, his chassis was severely damaged on a few occasions, necessitating a complete overhaul. Reports regarding Karchev's mechanical upgrades are copious, and I won't bore you with the technical details. However, I did uncover one interesting document. This log entry from one of Karchev's mechanics is intriguing because it details an instance where Karchev's warjack chassis and his vivification housing were almost completely destroyed, and yet he survived again.
I have completed the repairs to Commander Karchev's vivification housing, and it has been sent to the facility where he is currently residing. I took the opportunity to make a number of minor improvements, primarily to the waste disposal systems. The odor was becoming quite strong, and the cortical pathways. The improved housing should keep the commander much cleaner and allow finer control of his warjack armature. One further note. The damage to the old housing was extensive. Apparently the commander took a direct hit from a Defender heavy cannon, and it failed completely. This left Commander Karchev without the support of the mechanical systems that were supposedly keeping him alive for nearly 13 hours. What's more, when they recovered his body, we discovered his torso had atrophied considerably, and surgeons had to remove considerable sections of his withered torso. Lieutenant Valadin Irovisk.
In addition to the fact that Karchev survived, again without mechanical aid, it should be noted that he was well over 100 years old at the time of this report. I think it is fair to speculate that something about his vivification housing was doing more than keeping him alive and allowing him mobility on the battlefield. It was, and still is, obviously extending his natural lifespan. Additionally, it appears that Karchev was able to survive without the aid of his housing for an extended period. The mystery of this may give some indication as to why this technology has never been successfully repeated. How much of Karchev's survival is singular to the man, and how much it is to the machine? In recent years, Karchev has played an important part in the wars that have consumed Western Immoran, always at the heart of each conflict, inflicting death and devastation upon the enemies of the motherland. He has become somewhat of a Khadoran boogeyman, his very presence striking fear into the hearts of those who stand against him. There are volumes upon volumes of reports covering Karchev's military endeavors, but I will simply summarize Karchev's involvements in the major conflicts of the last decade. During the initial attack that triggered the llael's war, Karchev played a pivotal role in keeping Signar from sending vital reinforcements to its besieged city. To occupy the First Army at Northgard, Karchev was given command of over 24 damaged and aging warjacks and a token number of troops, and sent to lay siege upon that great castle. This was more ruse than practical attack, but the appearance of Karchev and so many warjacks had a desired effect, and the First Army divisions there were kept occupied long enough for Khador to initiate their offensive against Western Llael. Later in the war, Karchev was given an opportunity to showcase his brutality upon the citizenry of Riversmet. Several previous battles had been conducted in the vicinity of this town, initially with the goal of taking the city with as little damage as possible. With the heavily fortified northern city of Larin remained defiant against the occupiers, including the estimated arcanists of the Order of the Golden Crucible, Riversmet was singled out for punitive measures. Karchev was given command to obliterate the city and everyone who lived within it as a lesson to the defenders of Larin. Karchev and an overwhelming force of warjacks and infantry smashed through Riversmet's defenses, slaughtering thousands in the process. In the aftermath of this battle, the city of Larin surrendered to Khador without a single shot, their morale utterly broken. As brutal as this attack is remembered, it is deemed one of the greatest strategic successes in the war, giving Larin's reputation for unsaleable fortifications. After the fall of Merrywind, Commandant Iris launched the first of 2 attacks on the northern Signaran fortress of Northgard. Although the first attack was unsuccessful, it cost the Signarans dearly, largely due to the initial offensive led by Karchev. Reports indicate that he personally destroyed half a dozen Signaran warjacks and slaughtered scores of trenchers and storm knights before quitting the field and retreating with the rest of the Khadoran army. This initial attack cost the Khadorans heavily in terms of casualties, but ultimately the Empire's ability to recuperate proved greater than Signar's. Iris again attacked Northgard in less than 6 months after the previous failed attempt to take the fortress. This time he was successful, and again Signar lost thousands of troops in the siege. Interestingly, the Lord and General of Northgard was Earl Hagen Cathmore, the descendant of Drake Cathmore, the warcaster with whom Karchev fought his famous duel with at the Battle of the Tongue. Despite the fact that Karchev had killed a number of Drake Cathmore's descendants over the years, Earl Hagen Cathmore stood his ground when the castle was taken and refused to surrender. For his bravery, Karchev slew the man shortly thereafter, proving his thirst for revenge had not been slaked. After the fall of Northgard, Khador's next significant offensive against Signar was the recent Battle of Portsbourne. Here, again, Karchev is unleashed upon the enemies of Khador to devastating effect. During the initial attack, Karchev fought through the nearly impenetrable defenses of Portbourne and managed to breach the outer wall. Khador used this breach to subsequently attack and overwhelm the defenders of this portion of the city north of the river. The exact circumstances in Portbourne are still not well known or reported on either side, but it seems as though Khador successfully seized the city, but was then interrupted by the arrival of a massive Cryxian army behind them. Unfortunately, reports from the city since that time have been scant. I did manage to locate a document that mentions Commander Karchev and the aftermath of the Cryxian attack. Dated after Karchev disappeared, it is from a senior battle mechanic who volunteered to join a small mobile force to look for evidence of Karchev and provide repairs if they could locate him. What he found was quite chilling.
We found the hull of Commander Karchev's warjack chassis near the river. It has been completely disassembled, the vivification housing removed, and then stripped of its most vital components. Of the commander we saw no sign. but Cryxian necrotechs have been in the area. We found the grotesque leavings of their handiwork in much evidence. I fear to write about what I am thinking, but I see no other outcome. I believe Cryx has taken Commander Karchev, and I believe the necrotechs are keeping him alive. For what purpose I cannot begin to understand. I fear all we can do now is pray the commander does not survive long enough. Morrow have mercy on him. Chief Mechanic Dmitri Druziv.
Chief Druz's report is the last piece of information I could find regarding Commander Karchev, and I must agree with his conclusion. Alexander Karchev has sown much death and discord in Western Imran, but I cannot help but feel some sympathy for the man. Morrow knows what horrors he may endure at the hands, hooks, and talons of Cryxian necrotechs and neurosurgeons. However, I will say this. Commander Karchev has weathered more pain and personal hardship than any man I have ever encountered. He has survived against incredible odds time and time again, largely because he simply refuses to die. Should he survive and be returned to Khador to once again terrorize the battlefields of the Iron Kingdoms, I, for one, would not be overly surprised. Greetings, dear viewer. This is GAVYN Kyle. If you've liked this dossier on this particular subject and wish to see more from my classified files, then it would be in your best interest to like, comment, and most of all, subscribing to this channel. If you fail to do so, then the rest of my files shall remain under lock and key where no mortal eyes will see them. If you wish to support this channel in a more direct fashion, there is Patreon in the description, as well as PayPal. You can also support the channel by purchasing the author's new book, New World, on sale on Amazon. Link is in the description below. Until next time, this has been GAVYN Kyle. Thank you for enjoying my files, and until the next time.